Welcome inside another edition of Land at 10 Live. Sam Rayton, former Michigan Wolverine Chris Howard. We'll try to keep Chris's dauber up a little bit today after Michigan let him down in the NCAA championship game tonight. But spring football hot and heavy, so we got a lot to cover. As always, here over the course of the next 30 minutes. Look forward to doing it with you guys on our Land at 10 Facebook page. On a scale of 1 to 10, how disappointed are you?
You know what? I'm more disappointed. I'm more disappointed for the kids, for this team, and for John Beilein, not necessarily for myself, because you look at this team. They start out unranked. They get to the national championship game, and obviously it wasn't their best offensive performance. And so I'm more disappointed because I wanted them to experience what I felt in 1997 when you win a national championship, not just for yourself, but for your team, for your coach, for the school. So more disappointed that they didn't get a chance to have that feeling. But I think they'll be back.
Man, that's good. That was like his A take right there, and we haven't even gotten the show started yet. Let's show you what's coming up here on the program. More analysis from Chris coming up on the national championship game from a night ago in college hoops. Before we get there, though, we'll do our Big Ten roundup from some of the news and notes going on around spring football. And then after we talk basketball, our spring questions series will continue as we start to look at some of the high-profile storylines developing around the course of the Big Ten here. And as always, we got time for viewer engagement. Check me out here on the laptop, fancy schmancy. I'm ready to type and do what I do, and you know what it is. And Land at 10 Live on our Facebook page. You guys know how to find us. If you want to do anything about, oh yeah, how about that person that was talking about how Loyola was going to win? Are you out there in cyberspace? Maybe you'll answer back again. At any rate, so we'll get some viewer engagement over the course of the program, and we'll get more insight from Chris on the national championship game. But first, let's talk football. It's what we do here on Land at 10 Live. News coming out of Columbus as the spring practice is underway for the Buckeyes. That quarterback battle, it's one of the biggest things, the biggest storylines in the offseason. And now you throw this into the mix. Joe Burrow's a kid that, if he wanted to, could graduate and transfer. How does that play into the mix at quarterback for Ohio State?
Well, I mean, I think it's a luxury for Urban Meyer to have this kind of problem. You got a guy like Joe Burrow who can step in there and play. Obviously, you got Dwayne Haskins Jr., you got Tate Martell. Those are your top three quarterbacks. So that's, to me, is a luxury. But I know, Urban Meyer's talking about not being enough separation between those three guys and it really being hard. But I think a lot of that is also coach talk, because you don't want to designate a starting quarterback right now because you want to make sure the other guys stay engaged. You want it to be competitive. You want to challenge guys. You don't want guys to get comfortable thinking they're the number one guy. So I think most of the talk coming out of Ohio State really is coach talk, because you don't want guys getting comfortable.
I guess that's a good point, right? Because what does Ohio State have to gain from naming a starter right now? I'm pretty sure that they'll have a starter in place when the season kicks off, right, and you lose that edge that you're talking about. You already touched on it. The news story is that Urban Meyer's been saying, look, there's really no separation between these three kids, Tate Martell, the other guy who's in that mix. But you think that there really is somebody in Urban Meyer's mind right now? Is it Haskins' job to lose? That's what a lot of people think.
Well, I think it is Haskins' job to lose. I mean, again, he came in relief of J.T. Barrett in the Michigan game. He played outstanding. He didn't let the moment get the best of him, and he had a great game against Michigan. So I think he is the front runner going in, but he can't rely on the fact that he had a good game against Michigan and let himself believe that he's the guy. He has to feel like this is a true competition. I might be 1 on the depth chart. I might be 2 on the depth chart. I might be 3 on the depth chart. He has to approach it like it's really a quarterback battle, because ultimately it is. But Urban Meyer is not going to make a decision 5 practices in who's the starting quarterback.
Well, let's keep it there for a second then, and let's assume, okay, maybe it is Dwayne Haskins' job to lose. We talked last week, and I get the sentiment that you have on graduate transfers in general, right, that you like the flexibility that gives. What do you do if you're Joe Burrow? Because at some point you have to decide when to pull the trigger, right? Because if he can be a grad transfer, he's got to start looking around at where there's some other jobs, where can you apply to graduate schools. I mean, it's not just so simple as you show up on campus someday somewhere else, right?
Well, yeah, and that's the position that he finds himself in, is because, in my opinion, he probably should have made this decision long before. Because if you're going to stay and challenge for the starting position, you're putting the head coach in a real predicament, because he has to do what's best for the team, and what's best for the team might be not designating who the starting quarterback is until it's absolutely necessary for him to designate who the quarterback is. And that time may pass when it's time for Joe Burrow to make a decision on what school he wants to transfer to, or if he wants to stay. So both of them are in a kind of a real predicament, but I think Joe Burrow, if he's going to commit himself and stay through spring, no matter what happens, who becomes the starting quarterback, I think he just has to ride it out.
Maybe unlike in some years past for Ohio State when they've had one of those marquee opening games, they do get a couple games. I think Oregon State is the first game, and then Rutgers in conference before they play TCU in week 3 of the season. So even if this still stays up in the air to some degree, regardless of whether or not Joe Burrow's involved, there is some flexibility, you'd think, for Ohio State that the rest of their team's going to be talented enough to get them through those first 2 games.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and those are going to be the kind of games that you want to have your growing pains for your young quarterback. But Joe Burrow also, and this goes for Tate Martell as well, you're only one play away from being the starting quarterback. And there's no guarantee whoever is designated as the starter when they play in that first game, there's no guarantee they're going to have a really good game. So you want to make sure that you just stay engaged, stay committed, because you never know what's going to happen at practice or any game. Your number will be called, and you just need to be ready.
By the way, you know what you're doing on September 29th? Because week 5 of the season, that's September 29th, Ohio State at Penn State.
Wow.
Think that game means anything, right? Still in the month of September.
Wow.
The last 2 years,
great.
Those teams have played some special games. And speaking of Penn State, more quarterback news going on there. We know the Nittany Lions have their starting quarterback in Trace McSorley, but now the questions with injuries at the backup position, there's some kind of moving pieces as well in Happy Valley as it comes to the situation under center.
Yeah, I think Tommy Stevens elected to stay at Penn State, who's a very versatile quarterback. He plays some halfback, he plays some wide receiver. I know he looked around at other programs, but ultimately decided that Penn State was the best fit for him. And but I think James Franklin and his offensive coaching staff, they're going to find a way to get him in, get the ball in his hands, because he's a really good athlete. Caught a few touchdowns last year, threw a couple touchdown passes. So he's going to be a guy that they can rely on and be really effective on the offense. So I like Tommy Stevens staying and committing himself back to Penn State.
So Tommy Stevens will be in the mix there in Happy Valley. We keep that in mind as the situation unfolds, because they've got some questions to answer as well. We talked about that with some of our spring questions. How does Penn State get ready for that Ohio State game? Who's that game mean more to? Quick pop quiz question as we do our spring questions. Ohio State, kind of the perennial beast of the Big Ten. Penn State, the presumptive challenger. That game's in Happy Valley. Who's it mean more to?
Well, I mean, I think it's got to mean more to Penn State, considering the letdown game that they had last year against Ohio State. So I think they kind of want to get some revenge, get some redemption in that game, because that was a game that they were in control of. That was a game they should have won, and they just kind of laid an egg. So I think it's probably going to be more important for Penn State, just simply because this is also going to be a game that has national implications moving forward, especially in the Big Ten, especially in college football playoffs.
Penn State gets a bye after that game, and then they take on Michigan State in, I guess, what amounts to week 7 of the season. Can you tell that we're a little bit fired up about college football now and spring practice and what's going on around the rest of the Big Ten now that college basketball has, in fact, worked its way out? And, of course, that'll segue into what we've got coming up next. We'll talk about the results of the national championship game a night ago. We'll get Chris' disappointment. People are already chiming in on our Land of 10 Facebook page asking how close you were to the television in the second half of that game.
Like this.
So we'll do that coming up here. And let's start with that, I guess, kind of lightheartedly. Did you feel like Michigan had an opportunity to come back there in the second half?
You know what? Once they got within 14 points, within 12 points, I thought we could potentially make a run. Defensively, Michigan was doing what they were supposed to do. I mean, they locked down the starting 5 for Villanova, but the big ragu, DiVincenzo, came off the bench, and he was really the difference in the game. Michigan shot 13% from three-point range. They were 3 for 23. They had good looks. but they missed all their shots. I mean, so it was really the defensive side have held up, but Michigan could not find any offense. I think Matthews finished with 6 points. Duncan Robinson got into early foul trouble, so he was missing pretty much most of the first half. So they were never able to get into an offensive rhythm. And when you can't shoot the ball well against a very good Villanova team that's well balanced and can shoot threes from anywhere, it's going to be tough to beat a team like Villanova. But this was the game that if Michigan would have shot well, it would have been a very, very intense, very close game.
Do you put it on the shooting woes? I mean, if you had to pick, I know coaches hate it when you ask this question, right? But if you had to pick something that made the difference in the game, was it just the shooting woes for Michigan? Or is it as simple as Villanova had the big ragu, DiVincenzo, and Michigan did not? Which way do you look at it?
I think it was both. I mean, it was really both. I mean, Michigan, again, they didn't shoot well, but it was both. I mean, Michigan didn't shoot well, and DiVincenzo put up 31 points. You know, you can only, you have to play an entire complete game. You can't play half a game. You can't just play defense and not play offense. So it was just a perfect storm. Unfortunately, it was a perfect storm heading in Michigan's direction. But this was a game that was winnable provided they shot well, and they just did not shoot well.
Well, if you look at Michigan's run through the NCAA tournament, I think that you could make the case that really outside of that Texas A&M game where they won, 99-72 and blew them out from the beginning, I don't know that Michigan played well in the NCAA tournament except for that one game. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I mean, there were some games where obviously they were more of a second half team than they were a first half team. First half, they came out slow a couple games, and then in the second half, they picked it up. They got big points from Matthews because he played extremely well up until this game. But they got big points from Matthews. They got big points, obviously, from Mo Wagner. But this was a game that was you couldn't afford to have a good half and a bad half. Unfortunately for Michigan, they had a bad half and a bad half.
Yeah, I guess I'm trying to think back to math with like absolute value and whatever. But if you got bad and you got bad, it's probably not going to end good, and that's how it works out for Michigan. And I see we got your daubers up a little bit. We got you laughing a little bit. And the folks on our Facebook page are certainly appreciative of these questions about how close you were to the television. So we appreciate you being a good sport. Let's spin it to the Big Ten as a whole for a second. If memory serves, am I correct in thinking, my mistake for not looking this up, but was it not Michigan State in 2000 was the last Big Ten team to win the national championship in college basketball, if I remember correctly? So we're going on almost 20 years since the Big Ten has won a national championship. What does it say that Michigan gets to the national championship game second time in 5 years, and that it's been that long for the Big Ten to win a national championship?
You know what? Winning the national championship is not easy. It's very difficult, especially when you look at the length of the college basketball season. You're playing against good teams. Teams are knocking each other off. So it's very difficult to get to the national championship team, but it's a national championship game. But Michigan State has been a team that has, had national championship-like teams, but were never able to get there because they were either knocked out in earlier rounds or they just didn't live up to the expectations of Michigan State. So it's not like we haven't had teams that could get to the national championship. We've had teams that could get there. It's just, it's very hard. It's not easy. So I don't think it indicates anything about the Big Ten. I think the Big Ten is still one of the best conferences in the country. And unfortunately, it was kind of a down year because we didn't have teams like Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin, teams that are kind of stalwarts in our division just weren't that good this year.
But let me press you on a couple points. First of all, with respect to still being one of the best conferences, I guess I personally agree with you, but after all, don't you measure it by national championships? I mean, don't you need your conference to have the best team in the country at some point to say that you're the best conference, or is that an incorrect measure to determine the best conference in college basketball?
Well, to me personally, I think that's an incorrect measure because, and we'll talk about this obviously later with Paul Feinbaum in his rant, but if you look at just from a college football standpoint, the Big Ten went, set a record for teams going to bowl games, right? They were, 8-1. Of course, my Michigan team let down. We could have had a full sweep of the bowl season, but Michigan dropped the baby. But Michigan had pretty much dominated bowl season, right? But
well, the Big Ten did
right, dominated the bowl season. But the national championship was played between two SEC teams. But beyond those two SEC teams, who else is there, right? So does that make the SEC the best conference, or were they playing in a conference that just weren't that good?
By the way, thanks for doing my job and saying that we will talk about Paul Feinbaum's comments on Jim Harbaugh. I didn't get that into the open, but thanks. Stick around. A couple minutes, we'll get to that. We'll talk some more football with our spring questions continuing. Sticking on college basketball for right now, though, let me get back to something you said at the beginning of the show and something that I wanted to make sure that our viewers got a chance to come back to. You talked about what it would mean to those kids. I mean, just take the rankings in the league out of it for 1 second, but just on the human side about the kids having a chance to play for the national championship. Did you have a moment in your playing career where you nearly missed out on something? I know you won the championship in '97, but you know, what does it do when these kids look back in their playing careers? Are they going to think back as the missed opportunity that they had here to win a national championship?
Yeah, well, of course. I mean, it's human nature to have regret and to always feel like, you know, what could I have done more in that moment? That will always live with them. But I think you have to look at this team was unranked coming into the season. I think they were predicted to finish 6th in the Big Ten. Where they came from and to where they ended in the national championship game cannot be overlooked, cannot be over or understated how important that is to Michigan, to the players. I mean, they achieved a lot. They fell just a little short of their overall goal, but the path that Michigan took to get to the national championship, I mean, that's a story that you can tell your kids for forever, and it's something that they should be proud of. So, of course, every player, every competitor has regret, but if you look at the overall and how they got there, they have nothing to be ashamed of.
I'm taking the mea culpa on this. I asked you a compound question, which isn't really fair, especially because it's live video here. But I think you had a little bit of a reaction when I asked about something that was a near miss in your lifetime, and if you could relate to that. Did you have a response to that as well?
Well, you know, I will say the near miss for us was the Iowa game, right? That was a game where we didn't play our best. We didn't play our best first half. I think I was actually knocked out of that game with a broken rib. But it was those type of moments where you can either say to yourself, once the game gets out of reach, man, we can't fight back, or you seize the moment and you fight back, get yourself in the game, and ultimately win the game. That was a near miss situation for me, and for me personally, because I was not there to help my team. That would have been something, if we would have lost that game, that I would have deeply regretted because of that.
You talk about the '97 game against Iowa, which obviously you did win.
Yes, we did win, but at the way that game was playing out, right, it was we were down 21-0 at half or something like that. Ended up winning the game 24-21. But that was a moment where, if you look back, because we've been playing so well up until that moment, it could have been one of those moments where you look back and you're like, great, we could have went all the way, and we stumbled right there at Iowa.
So your near miss was a near miss of a near miss.
Exactly. It was
right?
close.
If you follow along at home.
Right.
A couple more bits of housekeeping here on Michigan and college basketball season. We'll keep you covered here on Land of 10 Live as we lead up to the NBA draft and then everything that goes into the summer period and whatnot with basketball. But we know that our focus will turn toward football more and more as the offseason moves into the season for football with spring practice and everything that goes into that. First for Michigan, what do you think is going to happen with some of the prominent underclassmen on that team? Mo Wagner decided to take his name out of the NBA draft a year ago. What's he do this year as a junior? And then how about Charles Matthews, who, as you said, did not have probably his best performance in the national championship game? You think those guys are coming back?
Well, I think with Mo Wagner, I think he will definitely enter the draft. I think they both will enter the draft, but I think the smart thing for them both to do is to not hire an agent, just kind of go through the process again, allow Mo Wagner to go through the process again, get evaluated, see where he is, and if he's in the first round to early second round, then it probably makes sense for him to leave. But I think with Charles Matthews, I think, you know, this was his first year starting. He had patches where he was excellent, and he had patches where he wasn't so good. So I think the inconsistency with Charles he'll get that information provided back to him that will allow him to make a decision whether or not he wants to come back or not. I think for Charles, I think it makes sense for him to come back to really work on his game. He's a great athlete. He's a plus athlete, but I think he can work on his ball skills, his handling, obviously, definitely his free throw shooting, and more of his mid-range jumper. So he has some work to do, and I think he'll get an honest feedback from his advisors, and I think it'll be in his best interest to come back.
I'll just play devil's advocate on this one, or maybe you're not even disagreeing with this about Mo Wagner. I mean, he decided to come back last year. He put on some weight. He improved his game. He improved his consistency. He made it to the Final Four, the national championship game, had his moment really in the spotlight, would have been, I'm sure, the most outstanding player had Michigan won that game. I don't see what he really has to gain from coming back to school, aside, obviously, from finishing a degree, which would be there for him. Would you have advice to him one way or the other?
Listen, a lot of people talk about, coming back and to get your degree. And the one thing about Michigan is, if you decide to forego your eligibility and enter the NFL draft, via B, whatever sport it is, Michigan makes it super easy if you decide to come back to finish your degree. So the degree will still be there. The opportunity to be a first-round draft pick, to earn a lot of money to take care of yourself, to take care of family, may not always be there. So if I was advising Mo Wagner, I would definitely look into probably foregoing my senior year and entering the draft. Now, Mo, I think, is a different kid because I think he really enjoys college. I think he really enjoys the college experience and being around the players and his friends. So I think if he was going to come back, it would be because of that, the experience, and because you came so close to winning the national championship. Why not take another swing at it?
All right, so let me just do a little personal housekeeping, or not personal really, but for the show. The erstwhile folks on the other side of the glass over there say that we should mention that Penn State won the NIT. And we're not going to talk about seeding. I'll give you venue to comment if you want to, because I know that they've got a video package.
They got a video package. Yeah. Well, listen, Penn State, and we talked about this. Roll the package. There we go. So Penn State, listen, Penn State was a team that I thought should have been in the NCAA tournament. I think they would have done extremely well. There were some teams that Penn State would have faced in the NCAA tournament that they definitely would have knocked off. So I'm not surprised seeing that they won the NIT. It's a great building block for Penn State, and congratulations to them.
Oh, that's good. Very succinct. Thank you. And also, they've got a package on John Beilein that they worked very hard on. We'll talk about John Beilein as the offseason progresses, but if they want to roll the nice package they had on John Beilein, then I'm making him out to dry. There's Coach Beilein, the professor. He got a lot of national attention that he probably deserves. And I guess my comment, and you can react to, would be, boy, if there's a better coach right now in the Big Ten, right, as far as how he relates to his team, how he coaches up his players, I don't know who it is.
Yeah, no, there isn't a better coach in the Big Ten than John Beilein, and I think he proved that this year because, again, a guy, his team that was supposed to finish sixth in the Big Ten, they didn't win the Big Ten, but they won the Big Ten tournament. They beat the Big Ten champions twice, and they beat Purdue in the Big Ten tournament. So he is the best coach in the Big Ten, especially this year. I think he solidified that. And John Beilein is a guy who does it the right way. I always talk about he kind of speaks quietly but walks with a big stick. And that's been the mentality of his team. Nobody gets more out of their players than John Beilein.
In the last 6 seasons, 4 Sweet 16s, 3 Elite Eights, 2 Final Fours, 2 national championship games. It's a pretty good 6-year run.
No McDonald All-Americans, no 5 stars, barely any 4 stars, and no investigations.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, I had more on that as far as the new era of college basketball, but I want to get to the Paul Finebaum, so we'll do that coming up in just a second. You're watching Land of 10 live right here on our Land of 10 Facebook page. For news, insight, and expert analysis about all things Big Ten, join us every week, 6 o'clock Eastern, 5 o'clock Central, or on demand anytime. And anytime is just about how frequently Paul Finebaum decides to take a shot at Jim Harbaugh if he can. I'm not even sure if the context had anything to do about football. I think it actually was about Michigan and the Big Ten's performance in the national championship game. It didn't matter. In the interest of time, let's get right to the Paul Finebaum rant so folks can take a look at some of the things that were said and done. Oh, sorry, we don't have the audio. This is what I get for being a little bit late to the party
to
here.
the meeting.
Yeah,
that's all right.
Well,
Paul
why don't you summarize for us?
Paul Finebaum, had some choice words for Michigan and Jim Harbaugh, which comes to no surprise. I mean, listen, Paul Finebaum is an excellent journalist. He's been covering sports for years, but it's no secret that Paul Finebaum carries the SEC water. He's the SEC water boy, so of course he's going to take a jab at Jim Harbaugh. And also let's be honest that I understand where it comes from because it is warranted. Jim Harbaugh has not met the expectations that were set coming into the Michigan job. So, and I'm sure Jim Harbaugh knows that, and he will acknowledge that himself. But to say that the Big Ten is somehow a mediocre, or I think he even made a comment about the coaches. I mean, you've got guys like Paul Chryst, Urban Meyer, Jim Harbaugh, James Franklin, Pat Fitzgerald, and all these great coaches that coach in the Big Ten. I don't know another conference that has that level of coaching in their conference. Other than Kirby Smart and Nick Saban, there's another coach that I can name in the SEC right now. Not off the top of my head.
That's a big statement. I'd say the SEC's pantheon of coaches generally is probably up there. Here's what stuck out to me in the Finebaum comments. He called the Harbaugh hire, quote, a colossal failure. I don't know if you saw that the context was that Michigan had been to the national championship game twice in 5 years in basketball, but in 3 years at the helm of football with Jim Harbaugh, no appearances in the college football playoff.
Again, this is you gotta look at who's the source and where's the information coming from, and we know that there's bad blood between Paul Finebaum and Jim Harbaugh, and of course, so he's going to take a stab every any chance he gets. But as far as I'm concerned, I will judge Jim Harbaugh by the end of his career at the University of Michigan, whether it's after 4 years or 5 years or 11 years. I'll judge him based on that, not after year 3 going into year 4.
Okay. Well, I mean, we're going to find out because it's not going to be a hot seat per se for Jim Harbaugh because I don't think the folks at the University of Michigan are concerned necessarily with his stability running the program. But nationally, I think that folks like yourself that are saying to allow more time, at some point the time is going to become now for the Michigan Wolverines.
Absolutely, and it should. He's being paid enough money to turn the program around. He's brought in the coaching staff. He has the guys that he wants. And so, yeah, absolutely. You have to start winning. If you're Jim Harbaugh, you have to start winning. You have to start beating your rivals. And everyone knows that. But, to say it's a colossal failure after having 2 back-to-back 10-win seasons, that's just ludicrous to me.
When you talk about some of the other spring questions, that's what we've been getting into here on this portion of the show, and there's still time for you guys to sound off as well on our Atlanta 10 Facebook page if you got questions for Chris or for us to bat around here on this edition of the program, and we'll keep it going as spring football continues around the Big Ten. Let's look at some of the areas in the Big Ten that are changing. We both talked about Nebraska and how we think they'll be improved. What is it about Nebraska that we can point to and say that this is going to be different for this team? Obviously having Scott Frost at the helm, but is their defense getting maybe enough attention for the Cornhuskers?
Well, listen, Nebraska's defense was absolutely atrocious last year. They were ranked, I believe, the last. I think they gave up 436 yards per game. They ranked 13th in scoring defense. The Huskers allowed 5 opponents to score more than 40 points. They became the second team in the program history to allow more than 400 points in the season. So, Scott Frost has to come in and revamp that offense and get that offense going. But make no mistake, that defense has to be able to stop people. And so the emphasis is definitely going to be on Nebraska's defense and can they get better and can they stop people. The offense is probably going to put up a lot of points. But with the offense putting up a lot of points, that means not a lot of rest time for the defense because Scott Frost's offense it's a quick strike offense. So that defense is not going to have a lot of rest. It's not going to be a lot of long drives. So they better be ready when it comes time to play on Saturday. They have a lot to prove.
What you're saying is Ndamukong Suh is not walking through that door. Is that what you're saying?
He's not there. He's not there yet.
And then the black shirts, I mean, the vaunted black shirts of Nebraska defense in years past. And even the Coach Pelini defenses. I mean, Nebraska fans are longing for those right now, but still a lot of reason to be optimistic in Lincoln as we get set for spring football to continue around the Big Ten. You took it like a champ today. It could have been worse for you today. I think the folks could have given you a little bit more ribbing either on Facebook page or otherwise, but appreciate you for hanging in there. And I'd just like to point out for self-aggrandizing purposes that this program had a pool for the NCAA tournament. You didn't choose to participate. There were 2 participants, and I finished first. So
2? Oh, okay, yeah. You finished first out of 2.
Out of 2, yeah. I mean, but in the great words of Ricky Bobby, if you're not first, you're last. So I didn't want to be last. Anyway, Nate, that's for you, buddy. Thanks for playing. Appreciate that. Participation award for you. Anyways, for Chris, I'm Sam. We're back next week for another edition of Atlanta 10 Live.